Okay, next on our program, folks, coming to speak to the topic of First Nations languages as carriers of heritage is Sue Hanson. Sue is the CEO and Senior Linguist at the Goldfields Aboriginal Language Centre, and she has a background of over 40 years in the field. This is excellent timing. Thank you. Please welcome Sue.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for getting me on your program, and thank you to Darren for encouraging me to come along. You're probably wondering why language is on a heritage conference, so hopefully I'll address that for you today. First off, I'd like to acknowledge the First Nations people of the region and pay my respects to the First Nations, particularly the elders. Goldfields Aboriginal Language Centre, GALCAC, is an Aboriginal non-government organisation, and it beds First Nations mission, policy and practice in the pursuit of a bicultural worldview. So what I wanted to talk about was language. I'll just tell you a little bit about GALC first, GALCAC or GALC. So Goldfields Aboriginal Language Centre is actually a research organisation. It's one of the very few Aboriginal research bodies. People talk about a language centre, but it is a research organisation. And its main job is the preservation, use, creation of resources for the 12 endemic languages of the Goldfields region. But we do extend the work that we do to 16 languages. So whilst there's 12 endemic languages in the region, there are significant communities of other speakers. I've got some maps if anyone wants them at the end of the day. You're welcome to come and grab one from me. So you will find Warlpiri and Yunkajajara and other languages that come from South Australia and Northern Territory, also in the Goldfields, because people have married in. So there's about 16 languages we work with. So the main job the Language Centre does is to ensure that the languages are well recorded. So we do a minimum of 200 hours of recording of natural speech. And natural speech is just people talking and discussion, so you get all the nuances of language. Then we transcribe that. We linguistically analyse it for all the morphemes. We create lexical databases, which is like all the words and the bit of words. Create dictionaries, write grammars, and all the boring stuff that people yawn at, but people like me get very excited about. And a very important part of our job is to ensure that that material is kept safe. So we've got digital and hard copy archives. This is all done under direction from First Nations people, the speech communities. And the aim is to create use, enjoyment and intergenerational language transfer opportunities and resources for all those speech communities. One of the most important things we do as well is to create opportunities for languages to be engaged in the economy. If languages are to go into the future, they can't be seen as a history or a museum piece. They need to be a living speech form. And if there's economies around that language, that's a great way to take them into the future. So you see us doing really weird stuff like tourism activities and honey ant hunting tours and things like that. Right. You're probably well aware that there are around 85 First Nations languages across Western Australia. Now I'm saying around because we still are doing the linguistic analysis to see which are actually languages and which are dialects of each other. And each of these languages will have up to 5 dialects. So Nyangamara, which is just east of Port Hedland, there's 5 dialects. Nganadara, there's 3 dialects. There's also newly created dialects of languages like Murrawonka and Wongatha, Kundalii Wonga. So these are creolised Indigenous languages that happened on missions. So the work is still underway on really understanding how many languages there are across the state. So the region that we've got to cover at the Language Centre is just short of 1 million square kilometres. And I'll be really frank, we get 660,000 from the federal government to cover that 1 million square kilometres and work with the 12 languages. So if you do maths, each only gets around $40,000 worth of work per year. It takes around 20 years of consistent work by linguists and speakers to ensure that a language is preserved. That maybe the battery's running. that there are the speech recordings. Thank you. That there are the speech recordings and the grammar and the dictionary and the resources made. So if anyone wants that map, I've got some copies there. You'll also notice two different colours there. So there's language families. There's the Wadi group of languages, and they're the desert languages. They go right through to the Northern Territory and South Australia, and they've got some similarity. Like we talk about English being a Germanic language, so English and German are in the same language family. But like English and German, they're not mutually comprehensible. So whilst we say these are a language family, they're not mutually comprehensible. And down the bottom, the green one, they're the Mrining family of languages, and there's three there, Galamai, Ngaju and Mrining. And those languages have been really impacted by colonisation, and we're doing rejuvenation and recovery on those languages now. The other languages, there's 3,200 mother tongue speakers. As people who've been out to the Nganajara land, you'll know there's lots of speakers out there. There's about 7,500 Aboriginal people in the Goldfields region itself. So that gives you a little bit of a picture of the Goldfields region. Now, we talk about language being culture. When you have a culture that doesn't have or didn't have written records, the records for that culture were held in story and song rather than in books or in place. People recalled information and history and events through those stories and song. So it's really critical within these cultural groups that story and song is passed on absolutely correctly. And people will spend years learning a particular song and the exact way that song goes, the exact tone, and have to sing it exactly right. So some of the songs we work with can be 6,000 or 8,000 years old. And in fact, people will sing songs and not one single morpheme or word in that song is comprehensible today. But it's critical as part of the culture to learn that song and pass it on as it is. So they're almost like living tape recordings of 5, 6, 8,000 years ago. So us linguists get very excited when we hear a new song and people say, yeah, we don't know anything about the words in there, but we'll sing it for you. We're like, oh, let us at it. Let's have a look at it. We're very daggy. But there's a lot of knowledge to remember. So what you do is Aboriginal people talk about languages being the first internet, Aboriginal languages being the first internet. Each person remembers a bit of a song or a bit of a song line and then put everybody together and all the knowledge is there. But one person can't remember all that knowledge. If you had one person remembering all that knowledge and they got sick and died, suddenly that knowledge is gone. So knowledge is shared like an internet between people. One of the elders said to me one day, you know, Aboriginal people were the first internet. And I said, right, well, sit down and explain me what that really means. And when he explained, I thought, gee, that's really clever. Instead of using computers, people are using people's brains like a computer to create a web of knowledge. So the group memory is used to record and recall song and story. Therefore, these languages, these cultures value song and story above everything. They're given the highest degree of value. In fact, song and story forms a legal document, a legal form, a legal title, and it's also a legal obligation. You're obliged to learn a certain song. You're obliged to pass it on. You're obliged to make sure that it's sung exactly correct. That's your responsibility. So for First Nations people perceive the story and song as heritage items. Does that make sense? So people say, if the songs are forgotten, the land could wither and die because all the knowledge that's contained in those stories and songs is not passed on. By singing a song, you allow the creation being to hear that you're singing it correctly and the land will continue to flourish. So a lot of people today say there's problems with country, there's problems with land because we're not there singing the song. We're not singing the country. If you sing the country comes back to life. I mentioned that. So there's a song line, or there's a song around down south from Kalgoorlie towards the Nullarbor area. The Nyi Jokorba. Nyi is the zebra finch, and Jokorba means dreaming or dreamtime story. And this song tells us about the Nullarbor when it used to have water all over it. And these hundreds of thousands of Nyi, these finches, pushed the sea back to where the Great Australian Bight is today. Previously, the water was up to where Warracoona is, which is near the tri-state border. And the finches started at a place near Croydon Station, southwest of Port Hedland, and pushed the water back down to the Great Australian Bight. So the Nyi songline travels all the way from Port Hedland to the Great Australian Bight. If we look at historical records of Ice Age, we can correlate that song and that story to events that have happened. So it tells us that songline is extraordinarily old. So I've got a little tiny song for you. Were we able to embed it anyway? Hey, just push this one. Thanks for that. So that's a centipede song from the Mrinning language, and when you listen to that song, it's very fast-paced, like the centipede walks. So that song is reflective of the way a centipede walks. So if you try to sit and do timing with it, like 4/4 timing or clap to it, it's very hard to do. But what he's doing, he's singing that song as the centipede walks. I want to play that one because Mrinning language is highly endangered. People only really speak words and phrases now, and that's one we're doing a lot of rejuvenation with. So songs like that are very, very precious to people. But again, we only know about half of the words in that song because the rest of it is so ancient. So we have to do really, really daggy things like looking back and try and figure out what some of the other words are from other languages and records that we have. Okay. So creation stories, people talk about creation stories, First Nations creation stories, and they're basically a form of mapping, a topological mapping. So this ethnophysiography, which is something Andrew Turk did a big study on, a study of the role that perceptions of landscape play in traditional knowledge systems. So First Nations ethnophysiography includes the concepts of place and place attachment, rather than just saying this is a hill, this is a mountain, this is a river. So for many of the First Nations cultures, for many of the First Nations languages, you don't have generic words like hill, river, plain, because every hill has a name attached to the creation being that created it. Every river has a name attached to the First Nation, the creation being that created it, and so on. So if you say to somebody, oh, what's the name of this plane here? People will give you the creation being that created that plane. They won't give you a generic word for the word plane. So country is indivisible from culture, place, history, heritage and identity. Many years ago, some Wallumaggeri women from Fitzroy Crossing came to Port Hedland and they said, oh, we have to pass on a song. And I said, oh, okay, great. Who are you passing it on to? And they said, oh, we need to give this to the Nyangamara people. And got the ladies together, got a bunch of Nyangamara people together, a whole lot of tape recorders in the old days. And the ladies sang this song and we all nearly fell over. These ladies had held this song for over 100 years. So their parents and their grandparents had held this song. And it was about a massacre that had happened to the Nyangamara people north of Port Hedland. And the people had created this song to record the information about the massacre, and the people were massacred. So it was the Wallumaggeri people that hung on to this song. And the lady said to us, we have to pass this on because we're all old now. And I hadn't realised the importance of this song till they actually did it, and until we were listening to it and realised what it was about. And I thought, how incredible. And every single one of those women who sang that song are now passed away, but at least we have the recording of that song. So each language is inextricably linked to the country where it developed. Each language developed to speak for and about that countryside. So Jubbun people come from around the Leinster region, and you don't have any word in the Jubbun language for river because there are no rivers. You get water that accumulates after rain, but there's no concept of river or flowing water in the Jubbun language. So languages contain a whole lot of specific topological information related to a particular piece of land. So where do these languages come from? So people talk about language coming from the creation beings, from the creation stories. That the creation stories were roadmaps. People travelled long distances. And imagine just walking around in the bush, you randomly wouldn't know where to go. So you need some sort of mapping system to know where you go. So you sing a song line that tells you where you're going. And if you listen to people sing the country or singing song lines, they're sung at a walking pace. And people will repeat the same verse over and over. La, 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 la. Oh, that's that hill. La, la, la. Where do I go next? Oh, now it's this bit over here. Oh, now it's this section over here. So literally a song is a roadmap to move from one location to the next. And each nation that songline passes through has a responsibility to keep their section of the songline strong. When I was out in the Great Sandy Desert years ago, and we go to sleep at night, trying to go to sleep at night, and all the old fellas would start singing. And I think, oh, come on, I want to go to sleep. And they'd be singing away, and they're saying, oh, yeah, we're singing the country. And it would go on till like 3 or 4 in the morning. And you can hear the old fellas by 3 o'clock, they're like, trying to squeeze the song out. And I thought this would go on forever. I thought this, you just thought it was always going to be there. And I'm really sorry now because it's not. It's gone. Once people got houses and television and things changed, it's very rare that people get together now and sing the country. But what they were doing is each person, as the songline passed into someone else's country, that person then took precedence. They were the lead singer. And then as it went to the next bit of country, another person became the lead singer. But everybody sang the whole songline and was aware of the whole thing, but each lead singer had a responsibility for their section. So it's like mapping that's outsourced to the crowd. It ensures that there's quality control with the song, that there's cooperation between neighbours. Your neighbours and you have to get on because you share that song line, so you're cooperative together. There's micro-tasks. Each nation has responsibility for a specific section of the song. And there's egalitarianism because each nation has equal worth. There's no one single boss that's in charge of that song. Everybody has responsibilities. So the land is mapped through the language. La, la, la. You know when you make notes for yourself and then you go and talk about it and you don't follow your own notes? So you can kind of visualise song lines as a labyrinth of epic stories, turning this way and that. And every sacred site can be read in terms of its geology, its function, and the story associated with it. So songlines are deeds for the land. And again, when I was a really young person, a teacher out in the desert, people would talk about, oh yeah, we need to name all the places. And that's our connection to land. I didn't understand it. It's taken me decades to really understand. When people are naming places, naming their songlines, naming their creation beings, they're actually listing off the deed to their title to that land, their ownership of that land. So knowledge of sections of songlines that pass through a First Nation group's land is actually the title deeds to that land. And only authorised people may learn and sing that section of the song. People are very, very careful about not singing someone else's song or someone else's section of the song. Songlines provide invisible borders for that country. Because this bloke over here, that's his section, that's the border for his country. You don't overstep that. So in the goldfields at the moment in our database, we've got records of 163 songlines that passed through the goldfields. There would have been thousands, not just those 163, but we're kind of piecing together remnants of this topological maps through songs. They create a web of connection to a place of land. So here's one particular songline. And if anyone's worked with Aboriginal people, you know this one, Wadi Gujada. It's a very famous creation story. And it's about two men that passed from the Kimberleys through to South Australia. They're Goanna men, they're brothers. This is a public story. I'm allowed to tell this one. So at Punmu, which is in the Great Sandy Desert on the edge of Lake Dora, there are 7 small freshwater holes in the Salt Lake. And when I was a young teacher and people would say, oh, there's fresh water in the Salt Lake, I think, oh, you kidding me? This is just nonsense. And we went out and saw it. And these are only tiny little holes where water is bubbling up. And there's fresh water bubbling up, actually in the Salt Lake, encrusted with salt around the edge. And I remember first tasting it and thinking, what the heck? How can fresh water? So people explained it by saying these two dreaming blokes, Wadi Gujada, Wadi means man, Gujada means two. These blokes had a dingo and it had pups, and these are where the pups drank the water in the Salt Lake. So when you listen to the Wadi Gujada songline that passes through, Lake Dora is massive, but it will take you exactly to that little spot where those little freshwater rock holes are in the middle of the Salt Lake. There's no way you could ever find them if you're trying to walk around. It's incredible. The songline also tells you that the water is safe for drinking because the puppies drank it. So it's telling you this is safe water. So the Wadi Gujada story is really vast and it's got many, many segments. I'm hoping some people are recording some of it along the way. I know through the Canning Stock Route project, some of it's been recorded. It's got hundreds of verses and each one's sung at a walking pace because it maps out the country from the Kimberleys through to South Australia. Lake Disappointment. Does anyone know where Lake Disappointment is? It's a massive, huge salt lake. And Gumbul Bindil is the Mandurjara word for Lake Disappointment, and that means urine crack. I'm not sure if it means crackers in broken open or anything else, but it means urine crack. So the place where the urine's coming out. So if you look at the Wadi Gujada story, is where the urine's bubbling out. And of course, you don't go and drink where the urine's bubbling out. So it's telling you, don't go there, this is dangerous, this is bad. And it's called a Ngulu area, a secret, sacred, dangerous area where there's dangerous things. So it's between wells 18 and 21 on the Canning Stock Route. And the Wadi Gujada song very strongly advises how to avoid the area. Now, it's really interesting because then NASA has done some studies of Lake Disappointment and observed that it's a desolate, dangerous place due to the complete lack of fresh water. But the old people knew this well before NASA and had songs to tell people to keep away. The songs include, if you go there, you're going to be eaten by the cannibal people. Because clearly if people went to Lake Dora, they didn't have any water and they died. They disappeared. So you build that into the songline. So literally people could follow along the songline and go all the way through from the Kimberleys through. With the work we do, we've turned things around. So rather than starting with Western developmental processes, we start with the Nganajara developmental processes. These are the Nganajara pillars of society. So everything central, of course, is country. And country is seen, of course, as a living being because that's where the creation beings are today. They're living there today. And before the creation beings sunk into country, they provided the ngulu, which is your obligations, your ceremonies. They provided the law for that country. They provided the language and your kinship, your community and your relationships that you must follow, the rules for those. So when we do projects in the Goldfields Aboriginal Language Centre, we think about all of these 4 things at the edge and how that's supporting country. It's just turning planning on its head. But for Aboriginal people, when we started doing this, people got so excited because they said, I get this. I don't get the way you're trying to plan for that Canberra funding application, but I get this way. This works for me. How are we going? You've got to stop me because I'll talk all day. So let's have a couple of examples of words, words as carriers of history. So in the Nganadara language, lully time. Lully time. Can you hear anything with that word, lully time? Lolly time, and it's the word for Christmas. So it tells us a whole history lesson. That's when the kids out in the Ngarrajara lands on the missions got lollies, was at Christmas time. So they call it lully time. And Mandurjara people the same, Jogora daima, sugar time. That's when you got puddings and you got lollies, was at Christmas. So those words are a history lesson. They tell us all about Christmas time. Marawonka language, the word for the boss, madja. Madja, can you hear where that comes from? Master, madja. And we've looked at lots of different languages and they have a similar word. Ngarrajara people say madjada. So clearly, when the first Europeans came along, they told Aboriginal people who they'd enslaved at various times to call them master. It's there in the languages. The history, the record is there. We don't have documented evidence of this, but there it is in the languages. In Mandurjara, there's a really good word, ngali garbilba. Ngali is neck, garbil is tie or restrain, and ba is an emphatic. So it's the one who ties the neck. Who do you think that is? The tracker or the policeman. And still today, people use that word for policeman in the Mandurjara language. So again, that tells us when they first saw policemen and trackers, they had to create a word for those people, and that word is still being used today. So it's a history lesson. So the other thing that happens is with these first words like lolly time and madja, there was no concept of sweetness and lollies in large quantities. You had nectars and things like that, but not the concept of large amounts of sugar and lollies. So people couldn't get a word that was in the language and extend it and use it for Christmas time. They had to take the English word and phonotactically filter it and use that English word because there was nothing related to lollies in the language. So again, it tells us a bit more information. The same as for the policeman. They didn't get a couple of words or create new words or adapt the English word. They just went, what's really important is this person is tying you by the neck. And we need to put that into our language. Ernest Giles, European explorer, attacked the Gubrin people at what's now known as, I can never say it the English way, Yularing. Do you say Yularing? We say Ularing. Yularing means to cry in the Goldfields region and in the Gubrin language, Gulamaya. And Ernest Giles attacked people, an unknown number of people, First Nations people, were killed at this particular rock. And the First Nations men used what was called a rank and file system. So they had a bunch of people throwing spears. They dropped back the next file of guys, then threw their spears, and it went on like that. So Ernest Giles was a bit impressed by the fighting technique that the guys had. And that's a well-known technique in the Goldfields by the Wati, the old men, that to use a rank and file kind of fighting system. Now, there's a lot of people saying, well, where does that word Yularing come from? And we haven't found in any records, historical records, where that comes from. But for us as linguists, Yula means cry, Ri is a verbalizer, turning something into a verb, and I-N-Y, means it's underway. So when I first heard the word Yularing, I went, what do you mean, crying underway? So it gives us a bit of an idea that perhaps that word Yularing does come from Aboriginal people, the name for that site. And that's the place you're crying about what's going on over there. You know, Ernest Giles is there and he's killing people and you're crying about him. So that gives us a bit more information. See, this is the daggy stuff us linguists do, tracking down words. Then we go to Norman Tyndale, who was a linguist who went through in the late 30s, early 40s, mapping the tribes, and the location where Yularing is, around here, is called Ngulu. He's put it down as Ngulu tribe because he said to people, oh, whose land is that there? I don't know if you remember, I said before Ngulu. Ngulu means secret, sacred, something you don't talk about or something that's scary. And that's where Yularing is. So it maybe indicates to us again, he said, well, whose land is that? And people went, oh, Ngulu, Ngulu, don't talk about it. It's really sad. It's a terrible story. Because Giles coming through and that massacre would have been one of the first massacres that happened in the goldfields region. So we start piecing together this information and realising that perhaps that word contains a lot of information. The story for the Aboriginal story of Yularing is not documented, but we can recover that by analysing the word. So each language is like a set of encyclopedias. Each story and song is a book in that set of encyclopedias. Each language group, those 85 around Western Australia, is like a set of encyclopedias. You put that all together, and that's like the Batty Library. You've got all of the First Nations knowledge through those 85 sets of encyclopedias. So together the languages form a library of knowledge. It's a verbal library of knowledge. So to lose those languages would be like burning down the Batty Library. It's gone forever. Would anyone like to tell me how much money does the state government put into the Aboriginal Library of Knowledge? Yep, nothing, not a cent. So the state government does not recognise these languages as heritage and there's no funding whatsoever for the First Nations languages. So sometimes I go, how much does it cost to run the Batty Library? How much does it cost to keep Aboriginal languages and their knowledge of history and story and everything going? It's inequitable, isn't it? So First Nations heritage, the language heritage, is intangible. The language connection expresses language, story, song, thought, creation, events. Heritage is the natural landscape which is embodied in the creation being. So you can see the picture here of a scar tree. So as a European, people would log that scar tree as a heritage site. But for Aboriginal people, the whole piece of land that scar tree is bedded in is the heritage site because it would be related somehow to a creation story. Therefore, the natural landscape is deserving of heritage protection, and I heard people previously saying that. The whole thing is heritage. So Ben Wyatt, who is a former politician, stated that his father, Cedric Wyatt, noted with great dismay that Aboriginal people have been reduced to passive bystanders in the management of their heritage. So conferences like this are really rewarding to hear people saying we're taking steps to take a bit more control of our heritage management. First Nations languages are an intangible heritage. They're an inheritance for all Australians. They should be used, preserved, enjoyed, carried into the future to ensure that all knowledge they contain is not lost. Sometimes when we're working at the Language Centre and some of the young linguists say to me, oh, that's so big, I don't know what I'm doing. It's just overwhelming me. And I say, forget that. Think about the kids in 50 years, in 100 years, in 500 years' time. They'll have connection to their heritage language because you're working with the speakers. Just keep plugging away. We're not going to see results in the next few generations. We just need to keep plugging away to get these languages recorded. So Western Australia really needs to enact Aboriginal languages legislation to ensure that there's proper, focused attention given to the wonderful gift of those 85 First Nations languages of the state and the knowledge and the information and the heritage that's contained in them. I've also brought, if people always ask for artefacts and necklaces and stuff, I bought a bunch of stuff. If you want to have a look at them, you're welcome to. I have stuff for sale, and we've got our free newsletters as well. So I'd just like to thank everyone for listening and considering language as heritage. I know it really pushes the boundaries, but I think it's time for us to start really pushing the boundaries of what heritage is and how to properly preserve Aboriginal heritage. Thank you very much.
Sue, before you run away, thank you so much, and it's amazing what the centre's doing to keep the languages alive. Just a couple of quick questions from the floor before we move on to our final session for the day. Are there any languages that have been lost and are considered unrecoverable, so extinct? And how can we find out more about local languages and learn them? And there's another piece, someone else has asked, what is the difference between language and dialect?
Of course. So there are languages that we say are extinct, but we tend to not say that. We tend to say they're sleeping, because imagine if you're the last speaker of a language and someone says your language is dead, it makes you feel really unvalued. So Yabarara language, which is just around Karratha region, just north of there, everyone was massacred in the Flying Foam massacre except for one young boy. And I worked with the Yabarara people over a number of years, and we recovered 254 words of that language. And that young boy had children, and then they had children, so there's a bunch of Yabarara people with Yabarara heritage. Imagine getting 200 and something words back of your language. And we got to the point where we thought, no, there's nothing more. And then one day one of the ladies rang me and she said, Sue, I just saw a mouse running across my bedroom. And I thought, oh, yucky. And then she said, but I remembered my grandma's called it such and such. And suddenly we had one more word. So some of those recoveries, like we just celebrated because we found one crummy little word for that language. But recovering those languages, we go through, us linguists, we go through station records, doctors' records, everybody's records from old days. You wouldn't believe where we sometimes find words from languages. Someone went to a station sale one day and opened a drawer, and there was a sheet of paper sitting inside with all Aboriginal words written down. And the person sent me a photo and said, is this any use to you? And I nearly fell off my chair. And I said, yes, get it. And by the time she'd gone back, the desk, the chest of drawers had gone. And I'm still salty about that. I said, why don't you just put it in your pocket? So the difference between languages and dialects. So languages are 65% comprehensible. If they're less than 65% comprehensible, they're dialects. Once you get two speech forms that are less than 35% comprehensible, they're completely separate languages. So say, for example, you go to Germany, you'll still hear a few words that you and I could understand if we're an English speaker. And if people come over here, they'll hear a few words that we can understand, that they can understand as well. What was the other question? Okay, super.
Put your hands together again for Sue Hanson. Thank you so much.